Hello and welcome back to the Tech Pulse, everyone. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Mark. Jenny, have you noticed how the steady drumbeat of faster, smaller, cheaper chips seems to have, hit a bit of a weird rhythm lately? Things feel different.
I think I know what you mean. Like the new phone generations are great, sure, but sometimes the performance leap doesn't feel quite as dramatic as it used to maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Is that just me? Or is Moore's Law finally running out of steam?
It's definitely not just you. And it's complex. Moore's Law isn't quite dead, but parts of it are, struggling. There's a really interesting technical reason behind some of that feeling. I've been digging into some research, specifically around computer memory. The really fast stuff. SRAM.
Okay, SRAM. Static RAM. Right, that's the memory used right times the processor for caches, isn't it? Like the chip's super-fast scratch pad? Keeping frequently used data handy so the processor doesn't have to wait?
Exactly. Think of it like having your most used tools right on your workbench instead of having to walk to the shed every time. That's SRAM. It's utterly essential for performance. But here's the crux. The scaling, the shrinking of those SRAM cells that we've relied on for decades. It's hitting a major wall. Seriously, some folks in the industry are even calling it the death of SRAM scaling.
Whoa, okay, death is a strong word, Mark, even for tech hype. So what's actually going on? Why is SRAM suddenly struggling to keep up with the logic parts of the chip? Is it just physics being annoying?
You could say that. It's a combination of factors, really. As we push to smaller and smaller manufacturing nodes, 5 nanometers, 3 nanometers, heading towards 2 nanometers, the transistors in these SRAM cells get incredibly tiny. And when they're that small, the physics starts getting, fuzzy and difficult.
Fuzzy how? Like, things are getting leaky? Are we talking quantum gremlins messing with the bits?
Chuckles. Sort of. You get increased transistor variation. Imagine trying to build millions of identical tiny Lego bricks. But at this scale, tiny, unavoidable imperfections in manufacturing have a much bigger impact on how each transistor behaves. One might switch slightly faster. Another might leak more current. This makes the SRAM cells less stable, less reliable, especially when you try to run them at the lower voltages needed for power efficiency.
Okay, so they're harder to make consistently, and they might not work as reliably, especially if you're trying to save battery life. What else is contributing to this death?
Well, besides reliability, there are just physical layout limits. The standard 6-transistor SRAM cell design, it's like a tiny circuit with 6 switches. It just isn't shrinking nearly as much as the logic transistors, the thinking parts of the chip, around it. I read a report, I think it was about TSMC's 3 nanometers node, that the SRAM times density times improvement over their 5 nanometers node was only around 5%. 5?
Only 5%? Wow. Compared to historical shrinks, that's barely moving the needle. So if the fast memory isn't getting much denser, but the processors keep adding more cores, more specialized units, what does that mean for future chips? Are we just heading straight for a memory bottleneck?
That's the core concern, exactly. Cache memory is critical. If you can't pack more, or faster, cache onto a chip alongside the processing cores, you fundamentally limit the performance improvements we've come to expect with each new generation of CPUs, GPUs, you name it. The processor cores get faster, but they end up waiting for data.
It's like having a faster engine but keeping the same narrow fuel line, right? The potential is there, but it can't be fully realized. So it really seems like SRAM isn't keeping pace anymore, even if other parts are. What are the ripple effects?
It's a significant issue across the board. Yeah, that 5% number is pretty striking. With such minimal gains at 3 nanometers, chip designers simply have to look for alternative solutions or clever workarounds to keep pushing performance. You can't just rely on shrinking things anymore for SRAM. The old playbook isn't working.
And I bet this has major implications for cost too, right? If it's harder and more complex to manufacture these tiny, finicky SRAM cells, and you're not getting much density improvement for your trouble?
You got it. Manufacturing these advanced nodes is already incredibly expensive. We're talking billions for a new fab. If a big chunk of the chip area, the SRAM caches, isn't scaling down effectively in terms of cost per bit, the overall chip cost might not decrease as expected, or could even go up. That translates to potentially more expensive processors, phones, everything.
Oof. Imagine paying premium prices for the next generation of graphics cards or CPUs, only to find they aren't dramatically better than the current ones because the cache couldn't keep up. That doesn't sound like a recipe for happy consumers.
It's a genuine concern for the industry. The value proposition weakens if performance gains are minimal while costs rise. Chipmakers like TSMC, Intel, Samsung, they're definitely feeling this pressure. It forces a fundamental rethink of chip design strategies and priorities.
Okay, so the problem is clear. SRAM scaling is slowing dramatically, potentially throttling performance gains and driving up costs. What's the industry doing about it? Surely they're not just throwing their hands up. Are there alternatives waiting in the wings?
Oh, definitely not throwing their hands up. This is where it gets really interesting, actually. Yes, there's a whole menagerie of alternative memory technologies being explored and developed. Things with names like MRAM, RRAM, SRAM, even different ways of using DRAM like embedded DRAM or EDRAM.
Okay, alphabet soup time. Let's try to unpack those a bit. MRAM, that's magneto-resistive RAM, using magnetism?
Yep. It uses magnetic states. Think tiny magnets flipping direction, instead of storing electrical charge like SRAM or DRAM. A big potential advantage is non-volatility, meaning it holds data even when the power is off. Plus, it can be quite fast for reads and very durable, good endurance.
Non-volatile cache? Huh, that sounds neat. Maybe faster boot times or resuming tasks? But what are the catches? Because there are always catches.
Laughs. Always. Well, historically, MRAM's write speeds and the energy needed for writing have been higher than SRAM. Integrating it seamlessly and cost-effectively with standard logic manufacturing processes is also still a significant engineering hurdle. It's getting much better, but it's not quite there for replacing high-speed cache wholesale yet. Then you have RRAM, or resistive RAM.
Right? That one changes resistance to store bits?
Exactly. Also non-volatile, uses resistance changes in a special material. It shares some potential benefits with MRAM, like density, but faces its own manufacturing yield, consistency, and endurance challenges. The material science is complex.
And FRAM? That's ferroelectric RAM?
SRAM uses a ferroelectric material. It's known for being very low power for writes and quite fast, also non-volatile. But scaling it down to tiny sizes needed for dense caches has been difficult, and integration remains a challenge. So each of these contenders has potential benefits. Maybe better density than SRAM, maybe lower power consumption, maybe that useful non-volatility. But none are currently a perfect drop-in replacement for SRAM's raw speed and easy integration, especially for the fastest L1 or L2 caches.
So it's not like we'll suddenly see CPUs next year using only MRAM for all their cache then? It's more about finding the right tool for the right job within the memory hierarchy?
Precisely. Balancing performance, power, density, cost, endurance, and manufacturability is a huge multivariable equation. We might see hybrid approaches first. Maybe these alternatives start appearing in lower levels of cache, like L3 or even L4, or perhaps in specific types of chips like microcontrollers for IoT devices, or certain AI accelerators where their specific strengths, like low power or density, are more critical than pure speed.
That makes sense. Use the new tech where its advantages really shine. Now, you mentioned earlier that SRAM's importance might vary. Is this slowdown less of a crisis for, say, big data centers compared to my laptop?
That's a great point, and something the research highlights as a counterargument to the sky is falling narrative. For massive cloud servers or data centers, while cache is still important, they often rely heavily on huge amounts of main memory, DRAM, and architectural designs that can tolerate slightly higher memory latency. The sheer scale is different. For them, innovations in DRAM density, bandwidth like HBM, high bandwidth memory, or CXL, Compute Express Link, to connect more memory might be just as, or even more, critical than squeezing the last bit of performance out of on-chip SRAM. But for your laptop, your phone, gaming consoles, high-performance computing, yeah, that fast close cache is vital, so the SRAM scaling issue hits harder there.
Okay, so the impact isn't uniform across the computing landscape. Besides entirely new memory types, what else is being done? Are there clever design tricks to work around the SRAM limits?
Definitely. And this is where some really clever engineering comes in. We're seeing significant architectural innovations. A prime example is AMD's 3D V-Cache technology.
Ah, right. I remember hearing about that, where they literally stack an extra chiplet just full of SRAM right on top of the main processor die.
Precisely. Instead of fighting tooth and nail to make the SRAM cells smaller within the main chip's area, they go vertical. They manufacture a separate die that's basically just a big slab of L3 cache, and then bond it directly onto the CPU die using advanced packaging techniques. This dramatically increases the amount of L3 cache available to the cores without needing that cache to scale down at the same rate as the logic on the bleeding edge node.
That does seem like a really creative solution. If you can't go sideways, go up! It sidesteps the density problem for that cache layer. But as some argue, is it just a sophisticated, temporary fix rather than solving the fundamental SRAM cell issue?
I think that's a fair assessment. It's a very effective fix for certain workloads, particularly things sensitive to cache size like gaming, where it has shown considerable benefits. But yes, it adds complexity and cost to the manufacturing and packaging process. It definitely helps bridge the gap caused by slowing SRAM scaling. But it doesn't magically make the individual SRAM cells smaller or cheaper on the base die. It's more of a clever, system-level workaround.
And this whole approach ties neatly into the broader trend of chiplets too, right? Building processors like Lego sets from smaller, specialized blocks?
Yeah, absolutely. Chiplets are a huge enabler here. This modular approach allows designers to mix and match different pieces. You could potentially have your core logic chiplet manufactured on the absolute newest, most expensive process node for maximum performance, but connect it to a separate SRAM cache chiplet made on a slightly older, more mature node that's perhaps better optimized or more cost-effective for memory. It offers tremendous flexibility to navigate these scaling challenges.
So we've got new memory types being researched, clever stacking techniques like 3D V-Cache, and flexible chiplet architectures. What about the basic building blocks themselves, the transistors? Are there breakthroughs coming there that might eventually help SRAM shrink again?
That's the longer-term hope, the next frontier for the underlying tech. We're already seeing the transition beyond FinFETs, which have been the workhorse 3D transistor design for about a decade. The next big step is gate-all-around FETs, or GAAFETs. Samsung is already using their version in production, and Intel and TSMC are close behind. These wrap the gate material completely around the channel, offering better control over the electrical current.
Better control could mean less leakage and more stability at small sizes? Helping SRAM?
Potentially, yes. And looking even further out, research labs like IMEC in Belgium are developing concepts like nanosheet transistors, which are like stacked GAAFETs, and even things called forksheet transistors.
Forksheet transistors? Okay, now you have to be making that one up. Sounds like something from a sci-fi movie.
Laughs. I promise. It's a real research direction. Forksheets aim to place N-type and P-type transistors closer together, which could allow for even denser SRAM cells. These newer designs fundamentally offer better electrostatic control over the tiny channel where current flows. This kinds help make smaller, more stable, and denser SRAM cells possible again down the road.
Could. Big could, though. And we're likely talking several years out, maybe longer, before things like forksheets are ready for high-volume manufacturing for something as demanding as SRAM, right? So in the meantime, for the next, say, 3 to 5 years?
That's the key question, the practical reality. These advanced transistors are exceptionally complex and expensive to develop and manufacture. So yes, for the next few years, expect to see continued heavy reliance on those architectural tricks, more sophisticated 3D stacking, increasingly diverse chiplet ecosystems, and continued exploration of alternative memories like MRAM and RRAM, finding their specific niches where they make sense.
It really paints a picture of the semiconductor industry needing to innovate on multiple fronts simultaneously. The relatively easy path of just shrinking everything uniformly seems to be closing off, especially for memory, forcing a lot more creativity.
You nailed it. It's no longer just about lithography. It requires intense creativity and breakthroughs in materials science for new memories, new transistor structures, advanced packaging for 3Ds and chiplets, and sophisticated chip architecture to tie it all together efficiently. It's a full-stack challenge.
And Mark, we haven't even really dug into the broader societal picture much. If these challenges make cutting-edge chips significantly more expensive to produce, what does that mean for things like the digital divide or just general access to the latest technology?
That's a really important point, Jenny. Higher chip costs could certainly slow down the democratization of new technology, potentially widening that gap between those who can afford the latest devices and those who can't. Plus, if some of these interim solutions, like maybe more complex designs or even some alternative memories initially, involve higher power consumption, even temporarily, that has environmental implications too, especially considering the massive energy footprint of data centers.
It connects right back to that sustainability discussion we keep having. Making tech more powerful is one thing, but we need to constantly evaluate the environmental cost and strive to ensure progress benefits everyone, not just those who can pay a premium.
For sure. And there's a potential upside there too, eventually. Ideally, some of these new memory technologies, particularly the non-volatile ones like SRAM or SRAM, could eventually lead to lower times overall system power, because devices could power down memory blocks completely without losing data. That would be a substantial win for battery life in mobile devices and for energy efficiency in data centers.
A potential silver lining on the horizon then. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. The trusty workhorse memory, SRAM, is facing serious challenges in shrinking further due to physics and layout limits. This directly impacts future performance potential and chip cost.
Right. It's forcing the industry off the comfortable path of simple scaling, and the response is this multi-pronged attack, exploring a zoo of alternative memory types like MRAM, RRAM, and SRAM, although they come with their own hurdles.
Deploying clever architectural and packaging designs like 3D stacking and chiplets to work around the immediate scaling limits, essentially building smarter, not just smaller, in some ways.
And investing heavily in developing next-generation transistor structures like GaN FETs, nanosheets, and maybe even fork sheets for the longer term, aiming to eventually revitalize density scaling.
All while navigating the tricky balance of performance, power, cost, manufacturability, and hopefully keeping an eye on broader implications like accessibility and environmental sustainability. Did I capture the whirlwind correctly?
Perfectly summarized. It's a really dynamic and, honestly, pretty exciting period in semiconductor technology. The end of easy SRAM scaling is forcing a wave of innovation across multiple disciplines. It's definitely not boring.
It really isn't. It shows how constraints often spur the most interesting developments. It makes you wonder, though. Maybe we could ask our listeners this. Which approach do they think will yield the biggest results in the next 5 years? Will it be the architectural cleverness like 3D stacking? Or will one of these new memory types finally break through?
That's a great question for the Tech Pulse community. Let us know your thoughts. It'll be fascinating to see which of these strategies gains the most traction. It's definitely something we'll keep tracking here.
Indeed. The memory hierarchy is so fundamental to computing. Changes here ripple outwards and affect everything. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for breaking down that complex topic, Mark.
Always fun geeking out with you, Jenny. Catch you all next time on Tech Pulse.